Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on such a stormy day. We appreciate it. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this second book launch organized by the Amsterdam Research Center for Gender and Sexuality this academic year. I'm Julie McBrien, Associate Professor of Anthropology and the Director of ArcGS. ArcGS is a research center which brings together scholars and scholarship on gender and sexuality within the Amsterdam Institute for Social Science Research. The center is shaped by many differences in disciplinary contexts and traditions, theoretical and epistemological approaches, and methodologies. This also includes differences in emphasis on gender or sexuality within different research projects. As a center, we're committed to bringing these differences together in fruitful ways, enabling new ways of thinking, and we've been doing so for 13 years, and we're very proud of our center. Today is the fourth event of our 2023-2024 calendar of events, and it's our second book launch that we've been able to organize here at Spouw 25. If you want more information on ArcGS and upcoming events, we're on all the socials, but you can find it all. You can sign up to our newsletter, and you can find everything out on our website, which is arcgs.uva.nl. You can also just Google ArcGS, and you'll find it. I'm really happy to be able to introduce this book today, also because I have two hats on. I'm also one of the editors of the volume that's being presented today. We titled the event Debating Muslim Marriage. I'm also an author, true, thank you. We titled the event Debating Muslim Marriage, but the name of the book is Muslim Marriage and Non-Marriage, Where Religion and Politics Meet Intimate Lives. There are, I've lost count, 12, 14 authors, something to this effect. You can look at the book later. I've been counting and recounting the number of people in the book so many times, but the book is available later at the back for purchase. But we've invited 4 of our authors to give you a little taste of what is in the book. I'm going to introduce them all, and then I will turn the floor to them. So this is in the order that they will speak. First, Annelies Moors is an anthropologist, professor emerita at the University of Amsterdam, who conducted long-term fieldwork in Palestine and the Netherlands. From 2001 to 2008, she directed the Muslim Cultural Politics program at the International Institute for the Study of Islam in the Modern World. Engaging with the intersections of gender, nation, class, and religion, she's published widely on Muslim family law, dress, fashion, and face veiling, wearing gold, migrant domestic labor, the politics of marriage, and doing ethnography. Annelies waves so they know which one is you. Okay. Our second speaker will be Vanessa Vron-Najm, who is an anthropologist specialized in the field of conversion to Islam in the Netherlands. Since 2014, together with Professor Annelies Moors, she's focused on how converts to Islam in the Netherlands find a partner and conclude their marriages, as well as debates about halal dating, partner choice, Islamic marriages, and the political context in which these debates take place. Vanessa, did you wave? All right. Our third speaker, Ibtisam, wave now. Ibtisam Sadegh is a lecturer at the Civil Law Department at the University of Malta. She completed her PhD at the University of Amsterdam in 2023 on Muslim Christian couples in Ceuta, the Spanish enclave on the northern Moroccan coast. In 2013, she obtained a Doctor of Law at the University of Malta for her comparative research on religious courts and tribunals in Malta, England, and Wales. Her research interests include mixed marriage, religious identities, and minority communities. And last but not least, we have Jude Al-Qorani. Jude? She is an assistant professor of Islam, politics, and society at Radboud University. As an anthropologist with a background in Middle Eastern and Islamic studies, Jude completed her PhD at the University of Toronto and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Orient Institute, Beirut in 2022. Her research explores the forms Muslim piety takes after the Islamic revival and the Arab Spring. That's our program. Those are our speakers. Annelies, I will give the floor first to you.
Yes, thank you. I would like to start actually with a clip of spoken word.
I'll start with this poem. I wrote this poem when when the bombs were dropping on Gaza, and I was the media spokesperson for the coalition, doing a lot of the organizing, and we had stayed up to about 6 o'clock in the morning, perfecting every soundbite. And by the end, if you're Palestinian, you know most Palestinians get tired and start pronouncing our P's as B's. So we become Palestinians by the end of the day. So I was practicing my P's all night. And the next morning, one of the journalists asked me, "Don't you think it would all be fine if you just stopped teaching your children to hate?" I did not insult the person, I was very polite, but I wrote this poem as a response to these types of questions we Palestinians always get. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre that had to fit into sound bites and word limits. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre that had to fit into sound bites and word limits, filled enough with statistics to counter measured response. And I perfected my English and I learned my UN resolutions. But still, he asked me, "Ms. Ziyada, don't you think everything would be resolved if you would just stop teaching so much hatred to your children?" Pause. I look inside of me for strength to be patient, but patience is not at the tip of my tongue as the bombs drop over Gaza. Patience has just escaped me. Pause. Smile. We teach life, sir. Rafif, remember to smile. Pause. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians teach life after they have occupied the last sky. We teach life after they have built their settlements and apartheid walls. After the last skies, we teach life, sir. But today, my body was a TV'd massacre made to fit into sound bites and word limits. And just give us a story, a human story. You see, this is not political. We just want to tell people about you and your people. So give us a human story. Don't mention that word apartheid and occupation. This is not political. You have to help me as a journalist to help you tell your story, which is not a political story. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre. How about you give us a story of a woman in Gaza who needs medication? How about you? Do you have enough bone-broken limbs to cover the sun? Hand me over your dead and give me the list of their names in 1,200 word limits. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre made to fit into sound bites and word limits and move those that are desensitized to terrorist blood. But they felt sorry. They felt sorry for the cattle over Gaza. So I give them UN resolutions and statistics, and we condemn and we deplore and we reject, and these are not two equal sides, occupier and occupied, and 100 dead, 200 dead, and 1,000 dead. And between that war crime and massacre, I vent out words and smile, not exotic. Smile, not terrorist. And I recount, 100 dead, 200 dead, 1,000 dead. Is anyone out there? Will anyone listen? I wish I could wail over their bodies. I wish I could just run barefoot in every refugee camp and hold every child, cover their ears so they wouldn't have to hear the sound of bombing for the rest of their life the way I do. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre, and let me just tell you, there is nothing your UN resolutions have ever done about this. And no soundbite I come up with, no matter how good my English gets, no soundbite will bring them back to life. No soundbite will fix this. We teach life, sir. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life, sir.
By the end of last week, Julie and I were discussing whether we actually should go through with this book presentation because of the emerging genocide in Gaza. And we also consulted with one of our Palestinian authors, Dines Bedi. For many of us, this is not a time to have a celebration. At the same time, still, it enables us to at least come together and to share our feelings and thoughts about the times we are living in. So we also do this at a moment in which our institutions consider it legit, after 6 weeks of relentless bombardments and close to 15,000 people killed, to defend the position of neutrality, to state that the matter is complex, that we must be allowed to simply say, we don't know. Well, our book also highlights the complex ways in which religion, politics, and intimate lives are entangled. Yet complexity should be a starting point for analysis, for all kinds of complexities and all kinds of analysis. It should never be a means to avoid simply taking a stance. Not taking a stance, after all, simply means condoning the status quo. Now, we would like to also take this occasion as an opportunity to remember the late Noël Stennecker, who was one of the assistants in our program, and some of us have worked with her. Now, bringing the remembrance of Noël together with Palestine, we are planting some olive trees in Palestine in her name, as has been organized by Fatiha al-Hajjari, one of our other assistants in the program. Israeli settlers are continuously attacking Palestinian farmers and cutting down their olive trees. These trees are important, both materially for olive oil, but also effectively and symbolically. These trees have a strong presence. As the website of Plant an Olive Tree says, planting an olive tree is planting hope. So we are very thankful when we turn to our book to thank those who have been supportive of our project. And of course, we need to thank the ERC, which has financed our project and which has enabled us to bring together a group of about 20 scholars to work on what officially was the title, Problematizing Muslim Marriages, Ambiguities and Contestations. I would highlight, however, the support we have had from those who are often overlooked, yet without whom we would never be able to actually do our work. The people who take care of maintaining our infrastructure. And I would like to single out especially Muriel Kiesel, who has been very, very supportive of our project. We were also fortunate to be able to run the project at a time when there was still space, or was still more space than now, for improvisation. Many thanks are also due to Leuven University Press. When we started with Cambridge University Press, where I had published my first book, so I thought this was an easy entry point. However, what we were soon to find out was that Cambridge University Press was far less professional than Leuven. This was the case because Cambridge University only wanted to publish the articles that were produced for those with a PhD. They refused to take any non-PhD scholars as authors. Leuven was far more professional because Leuven decided to select on the basis of quality. So now let me briefly say just a few words about the content of the book project. The book project is about unconventional Muslim marriages, which have become a topic of debate both in the global north and the global south. These unconventional marriages come in a number of different shades and formats. You may think about unregistered marriages, arranged marriages, forced marriages, in other areas, love marriages, or early marriages, elsewhere again, late marriages, interreligious marriages, transnational marriages, and other boundary-crossing marriages. And what we do in our book basically is to address two questions. The first question is how particular kinds of Muslim marriages are turned into a problem, because a problem is never simply there. There are always actors involved in turning it into a problem. So who are the actors involved? Think, for instance, about state agents, religious people, parents, nationalist movements, feminists, etc., etc. So we look at who are the people involved, parties involved, what kinds of arguments do they use, what kinds of solutions do they propose, what kinds of media and styles do they employ in order to claim a position of authority. And secondly, what we do then, and what you have actually spent much more time on, is to investigate how the couples themselves enter into such controversial marriages. Who concludes these particular marriages? How are they performed? How are they authorized by the people themselves and their environment, or contested? Do the couples themselves consider these marriages in one or another way problematic? Or instead, do they face different kinds of problems? Or perhaps do they face the problem that they have become problematized by others? Now, our authors address these questions in a wide range of locations, both in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East and North Africa, both in urban environments as well as in rural areas and in refugee camps. In most of these settings, Muslims constitute the majority, and a few settings are Muslims form a religious minority. Most of our interlocutors were raised in Muslim families, but there are also some cases in which they were converts. They adhere to different strands of Islam. They have different levels of religious commitment, and some of them consider themselves as non-practicing or cultural Muslims. And all the work is based on longer-term ethnographic research. The book is divided in 3 sections. I'm just going to say very, very briefly about what the sections are about and what the contributions are about. So the first section really centers on this central question about the politicization of marriage, that is how and why certain types of marriages become problematized. And then how the people who are interpolated in that particular way themselves respond to that. So let's start with Julie McBrien. She looks at debates between nationalists, development workers, and women's activists in Kyrgyzstan on interethnic marriages and on bride kidnapping. And she addresses how these discussions play a role in future-oriented political projects aimed at transforming the nation state. Dina Zbedi, who isn't here yet, I think, but who will be here later, she examines the tension between the targeting of early marriage amongst refugees in Jordan by international non-governmental organizations, and how these refugees themselves enter into such marriages and understand their unions. And the women underline very strongly how their main problems are not the early marriage in itself, but are particularly state regulations who produce these problems, and they criticize how women are seen as either as victims and men are automatically taken to be perpetrators, so such a binary model. Now, Martijn de Koning investigates the variance between how state authorities accuse Salafi preachers and imams of concluding illegal religious-only marriages in the Netherlands, and he highlights how these Salafi-oriented preachers themselves differ and hold a wide range of views about such kinds of marriages. I've written a piece together with Samah Saleh, who is a Palestinian author and who unfortunately is not able to be here because of travel restrictions. And what we do in our piece is that we focus on the marriages of women, Palestinian women political prisoners, and we highlight in particular one type of marriage, and that is the marriage when they decide that they want to enter into a marriage with a man who has a very long-term prison sentence. And they do so as a means to contribute to building a community of resistance and to give hope to long-term political prisoners and their families. Again, the term hope comes up here a lot of times. And this in order to continue the struggle for self-determination and liberation. Then the next section turns to how and when couples engage with the boundaries between marriage and non-marriage. Iris Coleman traces how in Tunisia cohabitation and Islamic-only marriages are problematized in different ways. She underlines how that the majority view considers cohabitation as harmful for women, but young women who do so claim that their lifestyle is in a way normal, and they point to the positive effects of cohabitation for the future marriages they have in mind. Then we have the piece by Annerienke Fiole, who unfortunately is not able to be here. And she discusses the tensions between secrecy on the one hand and publicity on the other hand in out-of-wedlock intimacies and single motherhood in Morocco. She examines the role of social networks, the role they play both in concealing and revealing these relationships at particular moments, and investigates how this impacts on the women concerned. Jude Al-Qurani, who will speak herself about her piece, but I'll just mention it briefly. She also looks at publicity in marriage with an in-depth analysis of how a Muslim migrant woman in Dubai needs to engage with multiple publics to turn her relationship into a recognized marriage. Lubna El-Murabit focuses on shifting practices and meanings of the dower, and what women receive when they marry, and analyzes how 2 generations of Moroccan Dutch women signify the dower when they move from Morocco to the Netherlands, where they find themselves as in the position of a religious minority. And Vanessa, who will also present, of course, the paper, together with me, we discuss how converts to Islam in the Netherlands and the religious authorities who are involved in their marriages engage with the wali, the marriage guardian, and the dower, which are elements which are highly unfamiliar to them. Finally, the last section of the book centers on interfaith marriages and the ways in which they are turned into a problem. Shifra Kish, Rahma Bavelaar and I have focused on a particular poster campaign from a few years ago in the Netherlands that claimed to support women's freedom to marry across ethnic and religious boundaries. However, as it turned out in our analysis, it often served to emphasize the racialization of those depicted and presented particular categories of the population as a particular problem of integration. And Ibtisam Sadek, who also will present her own paper, focuses on the tensions between the Sultan celebration of mixed marriages as the epitome of Sultan convivencia, living together on the one hand, and the strong reservations Muslims and Christian communities in the enclave hold about such marriages on the other hand. Eva Fakhrenissa, who is our Indonesian author taking part in our book project, was also not able to come here, but she has a very interesting contribution about the complex negotiations of progressive Muslims in Indonesia who want to enter into and register an interreligious marriage, which is very much countered by conservative scholars and state agents. And finally, Rahma Bavelaar writes on Muslim Coptic marriages in Egypt, and she shifts the focus from the law as an institution to the practical bureaucratic procedures, and she highlights then the kinds of resources that women need if they want to try to enter into such an interreligious marriage. So I will stop here and I will give the floor to the next person, but I want to say one thing that I forgot to say after the clip, and that is that, and I'm not sure that everybody noticed that the clip actually dates from 2011, and it shows how unfortunately relevant it still is.
Well, good evening. Thank you for introducing me, Julie, and thank you for introducing the book, Annelies. I will highlight some of the features of the chapter I wrote with together with Annelies Moors about a research that we did here in the Netherlands. It's about converts to Islam and their need to own and resignify certain aspects of an Islamic marriage that they were not brought up with, and need to deal with because they are vital ingredients of the Institute of an Islamic Marriage. So it's my pleasure to share with you some of these insights. Today I can only briefly touch upon our main findings, but actually the personal stories of our interlocutors are what makes our chapter sing, so I really hope you can read it for yourselves. Our interlocutors would say that Islam is a suitable religion for all times and all places. Nevertheless, when a ritual such as an Islamic marriage travels through time and space, it's also bound to a specific local circumstances. According to most schools of law, the marriage guardian, the wali, and the dower, which was mentioned by Annelies before, a gift, usually money, but can be all kinds of things, can function as a dower, that is given by the husband to be to his wife to be, are vital ingredients for an Islamic marriage. But to translate their function to fit the circumstances of convert women in the Netherlands poses challenges. From the point of view of the women who participated in our research, after conversion, marriage gained new relevance. As religiously speaking, sexual relationships should not happen outside of marriage. And this religious prescription creates a sense of urgency among those who are already involved in a relationship with someone, while single converts are confronted with the question of how to find a spouse in a halal fashion. Many of our interlocutors who found themselves in this situation did not have much knowledge of what an Islamic marriage entails, and relied on their husbands to be. Certain aspects of an Islamic marriage, such as finding a marriage guardian or asking for a dower, were often difficult to comprehend. Many of them tried to sidestep the dower or were unaware that they needed someone to act as a wali, only to later realize it was probably the imam concluding the marriage. Or agreeing with a wali chosen by the husband-to-be, which is kind of defying the institute of a marriage guardian, because they are supposed to be from the women's side and advocating for her rights. In order to enter into marriage, most Islamic schools of law stipulate that the bride needs to be represented by a marriage guardian, or wali. And such a person needs to be a Muslim, an adult, male, sane, and there is a fixed order of priority. First in line is the bride's father, and then, depending on the school of law, other close male relatives. And the dower, too, is a vital component. When they enter into marriage, men are obliged to pay a dower to their wives, which the wives can use in whatever way they want. There are no fixed rules on the amount, which therefore can differ considerably. And although the idea of a sizable sum of money did not appeal to most of the convert women that we talked to, there often was a notable difference between the first marriage and, if they had a divorce, a second marriage. On second thought, many of them re-evaluated the dower as a form of commitment and asked for higher amounts. The condition of having a wali, a marriage guardian, who can advocate for the interest of the woman, negotiate the dower, or who can ask around whether the husband-to-be is an upright member of the local community, is quite alien for convert women. Women sometimes turn to imams or other men with religious knowledge to function as wali, but they may also ask other unrelated men, for instance, the husband of a girlfriend. Although some women were content with their wali, in other instances it was uncomfortable, and some deemed the performance of the duties associated with the role of wali unsatisfactory. In yet other cases, it was simply a concept they did not understand well enough to make an informed decision about who could or should perform such a function. When interviewing men who acted as wali for convert women, particularly if this role went beyond just being present at the conclusion of the marriage, this turned out to be no easy task either. When we spoke with men acting as wali, such as formal and informal religious authority figures, as well as men who were asked through their wives, we learned that being the wali of an unrelated woman is often difficult and potentially a very ungrateful task. Nonetheless, all of them considered it a duty. We learned that there are also imams who function as wali without much investment or explanation of what it means, And the women who opted for such a flyby wali, usually someone suggested by their husbands to be, would neither see him before or after the conclusion of the marriage. The men we interviewed, Annelies and I, took their task much more seriously. Yet, as the Netherlands does not recognize Islamic-only marriages, these men only had the means of persuasion at their disposal to enforce their point of view, and many of them recalled instances where women who had asked them to act as their wali disregarded their advice or guidance, or went wali shopping. Like mentioned before, as women converts become more experienced, they are often more intent on claiming their Islamic rights. They become more selective in the choice of the wali and may insist on a more substantial sum of money as dower. This also may turn into a collective process with other women converts and the women's groups they attend increasingly aware that they may be taken advantage of. A similar shift was visible among religious authority figures. Whereas earlier some were in favor of an Islamic marriage as always better than an illicit sexual relationship, they have become more aware of the need to protect women and women converts in particular. In the Dutch context then, the wali and the dower may function to ensure that the husband-to-be has serious intentions and protect women from men who only make use of an Islamic marriage for brief sexual relationships, for economic exploitation, or to facilitate residency status. So to conclude, when an Islamic marriage moves from one spatio-temporal context to another, it becomes enacted and resignified in settings where the context is very different and where the subjects involved may well have different aspirations and concerns. This is already evident in Muslim-majority countries where economic and political change have affected family and kinship relations, resulting in a decreased centrality of the marriage guardian, the wali, and sometimes to registering a symbolic dower. Such a resignification is even more pronounced when these institutions travel to secular Europe, and in the case of converts to Islam in the Netherlands, who did not grow up in a Muslim family, even more. Their fathers cannot function as wali, and they do not need a dower for economic protection because they are often in a stronger economic and legal position than their migrant husbands-to-be. As a result, converts may simply accept a relative of their husband as wali, and many try to minimize the dower also because they consider a marriage based on affection to be in tension with material demands. But with the proliferation of Dutch language courses, workshops, lectures, books on the topic of Islamic marriage over the past decade, and a larger body of knowledge and experience built up over time by converts themselves, it is safe to say that a better understanding and appreciation of the institutes of the wali and the mahar are emerging, but a lot of practical issues still remain.
So, I'd like to start by reading a part of my vignette to my chapter. Habiba and Pedro grew up in the 80s as next-door neighbors in a relatively mixed neighborhood at the North African Spanish enclave of Ceuta. Their religiously devout parents supported their friendships despite the family's religious differences. Habiba, Pedro, and their many siblings were always welcome in each other's homes. This was true convivencia, they said, nostalgic for their childhood. In their teenage years, the two grew secretly romantically involved, but found themselves in a predicament. Firstly, because of religion, and secondly, because we were like family, said Habiba. The couple feared that the revelation of their secret courtship would ruin the good rapport between their families. However, to the couple's relief, when one of the prying brothers eventually exposed their secret relationship, their families received the news with acceptance. It's logical, they explained, that your parents would like you to marry someone of your religion. But we got married and they have respected us anyway up to the present day. 10 years of courtship have passed, after which they celebrated a civil marriage. Because he didn't want to have a Muslim marriage according to my religion, said Habiba, and I also wasn't going to marry in church. Instead, in order not to offend either side, they said, they decided to have a civil wedding. We had a blast. We spent our wedding with our most beloved, smiled Pedro. There were people who didn't like it because of the religious aspect, but we didn't care. No one said anything to us. They complained to our mothers instead. But to me, the important thing is that my mother and my mother-in-law love us. They respect us. So what people say, I don't care much. There are very few mixed couples like us, and we are frowned upon, said Pedro, echoing the complaints of other Muslim Christian couples. We have always respected each other's beliefs. We continue to be mixed. He added to emphasize that neither partner converted to the other's religion. During their 15-year marriage, each of the spouses sought to transmit their culture to their 2 sons. We are an example of Ceuta's convivencia, asserted the couple, and the title of my chapter. So when I went to Ceuta, people were curious on what I was doing there, from Malta and coming myself from a mixed background. And I was excited by the idea that students would tell me I was in the right place at the right time because we have convivencia. We have Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and Jews. We live peacefully together, they explained. And we have many mixed marriages, unlike what then the couples themselves told me, like Pedro and Habiba, who explained that actually there are few and they are frowned upon. So in my chapter, I sought to understand how the interreligious marriages are pointed at to prove the success of convivencia in Ceuta, but at the same time problematized. How are the different ways that certain relationships are problematized and evaluated, and which relationships are considered an example of convivencia. Because it took time, but through fieldwork, I realized that not every couple fits the criteria to be pointed at and celebrated as an example of Ceuta's convivencia. So during my 14 months of fieldwork, I too started to use the language of 4 religions, 4 groups living together in a small enclave. And I too saw, what it meant to have convivencia. So there were celebrations that were considered, proof of convivencia, and celebrations to promote convivencia. There is no official record as to how many numbers of people identify with each religious community, and less so as to how many mixed couples there are. I conducted in-depth, semi-structured interviews with 35 Muslim Christian couples, and soon learned that actually very few involved Ceutans, which is interesting considering the discourse that Ceuta is a great place to study interreligious marriages, and then only to learn that many of these couples did not even involve Ceutans. In fact, 13 of the couples that I had various interviews with were co-national, meaning they were both Spanish, but some involved as one Ceutan partner and one from the peninsula, mainland Spain. Whereas 22 couples were transnational. Many of them were Moroccan women married to peninsular men, Spanish men. In my chapter, I tried to first contextualize Ceuta, because I was continuously told this is Spain. So it's not possible to talk about convivencia without also taking note of the fact that this is a border space. It is where EU meets Morocco, where Spain meets Morocco, and therefore I show how the EU membership requires in the 80s brought about not only the physical border, but also the Muslims in the enclave were for the first time given Sudan and Spanish citizenship. So who are the couples that marry? Are there many? Are there few? My interest wasn't so much towards the numbers, but rather how do people understand interreligious marriages within this context? I learned that, and I show in my chapter, that converting from one religion to another, to the religion of the spouse, does not make an interreligious relationship monophate. People would still view that relationship as an interreligious couple, by the very fact that identification of religion is also ethnic, and people are seen as being born into a religion, which they cannot wave aside, not even through conversion. So, Christian women and Muslim men. Christian women are often told to be careful from Muslim men. They would lure you in, they will convert you, they will force you to wear a veil and never see your family. These are the words of Christian women who entered into such relationships and the type of warnings they would get. The problematization of these relationships is as I explained, that Muslim boys just want to have fun. So the fear of Christian women and the Christian community is that Muslim men will sexualize the Christian woman and will break up with them at the point of marriage. Muslim women, on the other hand, are told that it is prohibited to marry a Christian man. So often they are viewed as betraying their families and their religion if they marry Christian men, even if she and her family are not practicing Muslims, because obviously of the very language of convivencia that brings about the idea of belonging to a community, and therefore even marriage is seen as an act towards or against convivencia. There is suspicion that men that convert only do so to marry their Muslim partners. And then transnational Muslim Christian couples, the Moroccan Spanish couples, were always told, the discourse is that Moroccans want documents. They're marrying their spouses, their Spanish spouses, in order to obtain Spanish citizenship. So, some conclusions. Although Sutan convivencia discourse attempts to unify the very idea that we are Sutan despite our different religions, nonetheless remains grounded on the preservation of difference, on creating us versus them, us Christian versus them Muslim. And then when it includes the Moroccans, then it's the Moroccan other, us Sutans versus Moroccans. So convivencia is really the conservation of difference. And therefore, the ones that are seen as an example of this convivencia are the interreligious couples who emphasize their difference and continue to remain mixed. Finally, what can really be seen in the chapter is how both Christian and Muslim community really see their women as vulnerable, in need of protection from the other groups. They are seen as, in need of protection from being sexualized and victimized. Christian women are portrayed as victims of Muslim men. If they marry, they become oppressed. And if they do not marry, they have been deceived by insincere men. whereas Muslim women are portrayed as victims of predatory Christian men who sexualize them. They either never intend to formally convert into Islam and marry them, and if they do, then their internal convictions are put in doubt. But this contradicts to how then Muslim women are seen, and brings about how the intersectionality of not only being a woman, but also being of another nationality put into context. Because the Moroccan women, instead of being seen vulnerable, they are considered as these women who are luring naive men into marriage for other intentions. So ultimately, these contradictory positions shows how interreligious marriages are both celebrated and problematized, and ultimately the various stratified suiting hierarchies based on class, religion, and nationality ultimately dictate which partners are seen desirable or otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Julie and Annelies for the invitation to speak here tonight. But more importantly, thank you for all the work in helping edit and produce this book. I am very impressed and also quite surprised that we actually got to this point. So thank you so much, because it did take a lot from your end, a lot of work and persistence. So thank you for making it happen, both of you. Yes. So, I never wanted a wedding, Fatima tells me, resolutely, during our first meeting since she became a married woman. We are in Dubai, in a Mongolian hot pot restaurant, reuniting after a tumultuous few months in Fatima's life. A Kuwaiti national who had lived in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, for most of her life, Fatima was in her mid-20s when she met Taha, a British expat of Turkish heritage. The two dated discreetly for a time, but when Taha lost his job in Dubai and had to return to London, Fatima could not follow him unmarried. The two decided to approach Fatima's parents, seeking their permission to marry. Disapproving of the match, Fatima's parents resisted for a year, after which their daughter's angst and persistence wore them down. They relented, and the marriage proceeded with their ambivalent approval. The chapter that I contributed to this edited volume examines how the marriage arrangements and wedding celebrations marking Fatima and Taha's union took material forms that reflected the particularities of many of Dubai's migrant marriages. Their case shows how the experiences of young migrant couples seeking to marry in Dubai are shaped by the limits and possibilities of the kafala regime, a system of migrant sponsorship that structures state-citizen migrant relations in the region. In the kafala system, one's right to reside in the UAE is subject to one's employment. In other words, upon losing their jobs, migrants are compelled to return home, regardless of how long they have been living and working in the UAE. The resultant uncertainty and transience that non-citizens experience fundamentally colors every aspect of their lives, including their social and intimate personal relations. Such impermanence plays a particular role in matters of marriage. As anthropologists have persuasively argued, becoming married is a performative action that entails not only acts undertaken and words uttered, but also necessitates an audience to witness and affirm its meaning. Though the composition of this audience might vary across contexts, it often consists of a community of people with whom one possesses long-standing ties nurtured over time. For some migrants in the UAE, however, the kafala system challenges the establishment or maintenance of such enduring networks and community relations in their place of residence. As a result, such a situation produces new questions about who and what is needed to make a marriage meaningful. This is particularly the case for migrants who remain outside ethno-national diasporic networks, as it was for Fatima, Taha, and Fatima's family. Understanding marriage as a process rather than an either-or state also draws attention to how becoming married is a way by which relations between people are created and reworked, not only between two individuals, but within and across the various communities to which the couple belong. The chapter locates these shifting and burgeoning networks in their material manifestations, exploring how such social relations are made tangible in objects and practices. By exploring the materialities of marriage, I mean considering how embodied practices and material objects related to marriage procedures figure into the ways that connections between people are produced and reproduced. In the chapter, I trace what it means for non-citizens like Fatima and Taha, who meet in Dubai, to make their marriage material. I show how significantly none of the nuptial events takes place in Dubai itself. The nikah, the concluding of the marriage contract, and a small azima, or marriage banquet, were conducted in Kuwait among Fatima's relatives. A wedding party was held in London amidst the Turkish diasporic community that Taha grew up in. I explore how in these distinct settings, Fatima and Taha's marriage takes material form through the giving of the dower, the signing of the marriage contract, the procurement of legal papers that officiate the relationship, the exchange of gold jewelry as part of the dower, and the artifacts and practices that animate wedding festivities. These material sites are tangible manifestations of the social relations that take form as a couple marries. Outlining the materialities of Fatima's nuptials across different contexts and communities, the chapter demonstrates how this materiality and the marriage that it invokes become conceivable only insofar as it is witnessed and actualized by a community. It follows Fatima's narration of the events that transform her into a lawfully married woman before the eyes of God, the modern nation-state, her extended family in Kuwait, and North London's Turkish diaspora. Although Fatima's marriage remains immaterial in Dubai, it takes shape elsewhere. In Kuwait, the marriage materializes in relation to the Sharia, to state legislation and Fatima's extended family. In the UK, the Turkish diaspora, of which Taha and his family are part, guide how the marriage transpires, what it looks like. I trace these moments in the chapter, exploring the intersections of marriage, community, and materiality, considering the constellations they take in the lives of migrant Muslim couples who meet in Dubai. What implications does this articulation of the connections between marriage, materiality, and community have for other aspects of kinship and relationality among migrants in Dubai, or in the Gulf more broadly? I began this presentation with Fatima's firm declaration that she never wanted a wedding. How does someone who wanted no wedding end up with a transnational celebration in 3 parts? Upon first glance, Fatima's desire to forego a wedding might be read as a wish to evade the communal ties that the materiality of a wedding presumes, establishes, and entrenches. At the same time, I argue, Fatima's relationship with Taha does in fact matter beyond the two of them. The chapter shows how, despite the absence of a community in Dubai to legitimize her marriage, Fatima remains connected to her family's Kuwait-based community through her efforts to maintain a relationship with her parents. In the process, these familial ties, while reconfigured, are also re-established. At the same time, her marriage is also an opportunity to create new connections with people she has never met before. The network drawn together by Taha's mother in London formed a new community to which Fatima was incorporated. Thus, As I show, Fatima and Taha's case demonstrates and that there remains important threads that still do connect young lovers to others, to their parents, and by extension, to aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents, neighbors, and friends. Insofar as some sense of community remains, albeit elsewhere, beyond Dubai, there will remain some push, some need to make a relationship material. And from that materiality and marriage springs new avenues for community. Thank you.
So the floor is open to questions. Raise your hand if you have one.
Thank you. I actually had a question for Ibtisam. So you were saying that particularly the women, I think, but perhaps also the men, but in particular the women were warned against these interfaith marriages. And I was wondering, because that didn't become entirely clear to me, who is actually doing the warning? So is it, who is giving these warnings? So is it family, is it particular institutions, friends, and do these different circles actually matter to how people respond to that?
I think I can speak quite loud.
But it's for the live stream. The people on live stream can't hear you if there's no microphone.
It's like... Yeah. Okay, hello. Okay, so they would receive these warnings from family, friends, people from their communities. What was interesting is that despite being in themselves in relationships with a Muslim partner, they would nonetheless reproduce the very same discourse that was said to them and speak of themselves as being in unique situations because, you know, I got a good deal sort of thing, but there are all these other Christian women who are in a different situation. What was interesting was that nonetheless, everyone I met would emphasize that, you know, whether they've converted or not, whether it was based on religious faith, their conversion, or perhaps for pragmatic reasons to get married, all of them emphasized that it was nonetheless their free choice. So, yeah, I hope that answers.
Hello, thank you. My name is Miriam. Beautiful opening, by the way. I was thinking also about the moment we're in, the election results and the implications of that, also in terms of the victory of Wilders. And I remember a conversation, particularly with you, Vanessa, that about, I think you did an interview once and you sort of said the paradox of Islamophobia and sort of organized state Islamophobia is that the obsession with Muslims also leads to people actually being more curious about Islam, and that actually sort of the opposite than intended happens, namely people actually also sometimes convert to Islam. So I was wondering also in light of the recent, like this, I mean, some people are shocked about the election results. I'm not sure why they're shocked, having been moving towards this point for years. But yeah, how would you reinterpret maybe your own research in light of, you know, the coming, let's say, decade? What do you expect? Is it still that balance? Because it seems like with conversations about having these Islamophobes also lead, which could have consequences in terms of policy. Are we moving towards a point where the risks will counterweight the interests, where interests are still sort of like more about, you know, like fascination or just open-mindedness? Are we moving towards a point where that becomes a liability, where you're like, actually, no, this is just too liable, being a Muslim? So I don't know. Just trying to find an excuse to bring in the elections, basically.
Well done, Miriam. Thank you so much for this question. When I started thinking about my research long, long ago, it was around 2004, a pivotal year in the infancy or the blooming of an insidious, vile debate on Islam in the Netherlands, which actually inspired me to pick up my vocation as an anthropologist, do a PhD, do a postdoc, and here I am 20 years later. So I've been studying conversion to Islam as of 2005, doing fieldwork as of 2006, and even back then people were tempted to see conversion or interest in Islam and considering conversion as a rebellious act. In the 80s, we were punk. In the 2000s, we become Muslim. Well, actually, I found very, very, very little evidence of that. Because in the end, as I've been studying processes of conversion for 20 years now, and in the sense that Islam is still a very conspicuous identity, not much has changed. And so, yes, if you make that commitment of wanting to become a Muslim and to practice Islam and especially if you decide to make that visible to the world by means of wearing hijab, but if you don't wear hijab, there's always the month of Ramadan, there's always prayer times, there's always means of your Muslimness will come up. You will have to deal with so much bias, so much stereotype, so much questions that will be asked again and again and again and again. And also you will still be facing with concerns from your family. Sometimes your family will be PVV-stemmers themselves. But even if they are not, they will be concerned. They will be concerned, your life will become more difficult. Your career prospects might be diminished. You will be looked down upon as an oppressed person, especially as a woman, an oppressed woman. So I have not found much evidence of the fact that Islam's bad reputation is in the Netherlands is particularly an impetus to consider becoming Muslim yourself. On the other hand, there were a few of my interlocutors. For instance, there was a woman who came from very Christian background, really the kind of Christian background that goes door to door to try to convert people to Christianity. And in order to be able to be more eloquent in discussing her Christian mission with Muslims in order to try to have them convert, the opposite happened. She read the Quran, she thought, oh, this is very different than I thought, and became very interested. So it does happen, and of course I do think that the fact that Islam is, for 20 years, has been, I think, non-stop being talked about, published about, for sure, it makes it more, it's definitely an option, and that it is an option for sure makes a difference. Yeah.
Hi, well, thank you very much for the panel. I've really enjoyed hearing these nuanced accounts of the various different dimensions of Muslim marriage, and whether that takes the form of Muslim to Muslim marriage or interfaith marriages. I just wanted to zoom out a little bit and think a bit about what lessons, if there are any, from this fascinating way in which marriage has taken place within the Muslim community to people that are not Muslim, whether there are things that we can learn. Of course, marriage is an old historical institution, which is constantly being reinvented. It's also different from a geographical point of view, different in different places. But I wondered if there's anything from this particular marriage in this particular community that we could learn from, any lessons to think about what marriage should look like in the 21st century. Thank you.
Yeah, based on my own research on interreligious relationships. I can tell you what I've learned. I've learned that religion, in the fact that they are interreligious, does add an additional thing of discussion, but it's not the main thing in their everyday life. That's what I've learned, that ultimately, the couples do have other things they need to negotiate. What are we going to name our child? What religion are we going to raise our child? What food can come, inside the house? But in every day, it's not the main point of discussion. That's, I think, something that we, when we talk about interreligious marriages, we think that that's such a big dividing, and that everything surrounds religion in their relationship, but ultimately it doesn't. I hope that's one of the main things that I've learned. In the daily life, it's who's going to take care of the child, who's going to take the trash can out, who's going to wash the dishes, but also like money issues, how do we, relate with our in-laws. So it's not only just about religion. Of course, it is a main topic, and of course, it's a point of discussion and maybe even from the inception of a relationship. It's such a big topic that, of course, they would discuss it, maybe lightly at first, but still, it's something that they would discuss, about kids from a very early stage, which is something that perhaps is not common among monofaith couples, to discuss children, how are we going to raise them if this actually materializes into marriage. But it's not the main thing in everyday life. Yeah.
If I can just very briefly add to that, not necessarily in the couple that I spoke about, but in my larger work on migrant Muslim women based in Dubai, marriage was a big topic. But there's this kind of really emphasis on interreligious marriage and how that kind of people have to have these discussions about, do we allow alcohol in the house or not, or this or that. But these were conversations that my interlocutors were having with their Muslim partners or Muslim husbands, right? Because we assume that just because people are Muslim, they share the same values and ideals and practices, but actually what my research showed was that these same conversations happen regardless of the couple's religious background. So I think kind of this reification of interreligious marriage is more of a political concept and kind of problematization that actually is just a kind of normal everyday aspect of, relating to another person who's different from you in one way or another. So just to briefly touch upon that.
Yes, let me add to that. I think it's a very interesting question, but what I think is that what we have learned from working on this book project is the huge flexibility about what a Muslim marriage is supposed to mean, how you signify it, what meaning it has to different kinds of people, and the enormous wide range of possibilities. So I think both in terms of what people consider as a real Muslim marriage and the ways in which people live it in their everyday lives has such a great range of variety in it that I think that the lesson to learn about it is actually that it is really necessary to contextualize what we are discussing when we are discussing something like a Muslim marriage, and particularly because there is so much public debate often about it, which takes a very, in a sense, a very narrow kind of view about it. So I think it was really great to have this discussion about both what, how it works, that in interreligious marriages, that there are other concerns that are very important, and the point that the similar concerns that come up in interreligious marriages also come up in marriages amongst Muslims. I think it's a beautiful example, actually, about the importance of contextualizing and not taking anything for granted.
Yes, please. My question is for you, about the dowry. You said that the converts, they haven't been raised in Muslim families, so they haven't been raised with the idea of the dowry, and that you saw a development, a shift in how they the value they attach to this very Islamic part of the marriage. So can you maybe elaborate about that? How, are we talking about large dowers such as 10,000 euros, or are we, how big is the number? How large has the number become after the first marriage?
I think you first. I understand. First marriage might be memorize some Quran.
Very symbolic.
100 euros, very, very small. An uneven amount of dates. Can we just skip the dower? Also, a position found often in first marriages. Second marriages, a month's wage. I think that is still not 10,000 euro. So I think the highest amount of all of our interlocutors was 5,000 euro. But that was not because she asked for 5,000 euro. That was because the husband-to-be insisted it had to be 5,000 euros. Because he would feel, he felt obliged to give her what he would have given. He was from a Moroccan-Dutch background.
I wanted to say, was it a Moroccan?
Yes.
I thought so, given the amount.
Yeah, I think that the concept of the dower was very difficult for many women to comprehend. Also because, like I said in my conclusion, often they are in a better financial position than their husbands, have better paying jobs, have more economic stability. So then it doesn't make that much sense for them to ask for a high amount. But like I said, there's a reappreciation in general and also in personal life of that by making it a little bit more substantial than an immaterial or a very small amount, is that there's a commitment. Because we know many stories of convert women who were quite naive, thought all Muslims were great people who always tell the truth and are outstanding moral persons, and were taken advantage of. So that in that respect, it's also yes.
If I may add something.
Yeah, go right ahead, and then I'll take a question from back here when you're done, Jude.
Thank you. Not to just kind of, because I think the comparative angle is quite productive, but I had to cut out a lot of the ethnography and just really focus on the overview of my paper. But the dowry is something that also comes up, and Fatima is born Muslim, raised Muslim, has all kinds of Muslim friends and cousins that have gotten married. But similarly with the dower, she takes this position of, it's not really important. And anyway, she says, well, we're going to split it anyway. We're going to split our finances. So whatever he gives me, he's going to get back. So it's not something that is just for converts, right? It's something that born Muslims are also struggling with, as of course someone like Annelies and others have also written about prior. But just to kind of keep that comparative thinking of, it's not just about this transitional kind of moment of becoming a Muslim and learning a new habit.
Okay, our next question is back here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for a wonderful panel. I also really appreciate sort of this emphasis on contextualization, because I feel like, especially in the Netherlands, among lots of other places, the issue of Muslim is always presented in a very simplistic way sometimes. I will ask a question that I was thinking about, and I would just be happy to hear your kind of reflections. I really appreciated the bit about problematization and how lots of things are not problematic at all, but then they are made to be a problem. And I was curious a little bit whether you saw the opposite kind of dynamic, whether you saw people experiencing something and then making that into a problem themselves and maybe bringing it into a larger political arena. So sort of like the other way around, this is something that I'm a little bit curious about. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to hear what you think.
Anyone want to engage with that?
Well, let me start with one thing. What came to mind immediately, and that is that states often, that what you often see this process of problematization, that because states are increasingly trying to get a grip on marriages. So what happens is that state agents problematize a lot of different kinds of marriages, which are not necessarily problematic to the people concerned. And one of the examples, for instance, is Islamic-only marriages in the Netherlands, amongst converts especially, who engage in these kind of marriages because of a ethical idea. They do not want to sin, so they do not want to have a sexual relationship outside of marriage, so they quickly enter into an Islamic marriage, and then often, some years later, just like other cohabiting couples do, when they want to buy a house, when they want to have children, etc., they will enter into a civil marriage. So it's often state actors who problematize marriages, and yes, we often hear actually from people themselves, but depending on their position, of course, it is whether they are able to actually bring this onto the table. Yes, they will argue, yes, this is not really a problem for us, and they will talk back to state actors, as it were. You see the same in Indonesia, for instance, with the again, interreligious marriages. You see this in a lot of places, but it depends really then upon whether they are able to mobilize enough resources and whether they have access to enough resources and whether they have enough mobilizing political clout to actually bring it to the table and, argue for a change. I think that is what comes up in my mind as an answer. Like, for instance, also in Jordan, what the women really complained about was not so much the early marriages, but all the everything that the state had made impossible for them as Syrian refugees. So all the requirements about permits, etc., which made lots of stuff that would have made their lives easier impossible for them. So it's these kind of things that people would actually then often point to.
I'm not entirely sure if it fits your question, but what came to mind what came to my mind is that if you look at the Institute of the Marriage Guardian, in the countries from which large communities of Dutch Muslims have as their heritage, Turkey and Morocco. Neither Turkey nor Morocco insist that you should have a wali. Nevertheless, in particular in regard to converts, the religious authority figures, formal and informal acting walis that we talked to, the ones who took the duty seriously, insisted that it was the wali was a vital component, that yes, for sure, if the marriage would happen elsewhere, so not in the Netherlands, in a Muslim minority context, then of course they would put less emphasis on it. But especially since the informal context of the Netherlands, they were more conservative than their heritage suggested. No, in the Netherlands, as a Muslim minority context, they were more conservative. Yeah. Even, for instance, if they were of the Hanafi law school, which doesn't, which has a different approach to the concept of the wali, even those adhering to the Hanafi school would say, "No, I would not tell converts that." It's because I think it should be with a wali.
Sure, go ahead. Is that because of the lack of protection from family? Because, I mean, hearing you speak about this, my Moroccan, Dutch, young and older women, they assume that protection. It's there. No one speaks about a wali unless they spoke about the reforms, the laws in Morocco. Oh, nowadays you can marry without your father. No one really mentions a wali because they don't need one, because they have the family. But of course with converts, it's a totally different. So it's from a very Islamic point of view. You could say wanting to protect the vulnerable, the women, and wanting to be there for them. So, did they say something like that, or is it my own,
No. That is yes. I agree. Maybe not as explicit as you have made it now, but I think implicitly that was the message. Yes.
Okay, we're going to take one last question.
You forgot me. Yeah. You forgot me. I think it's partly a question, partly a comment for Annelies. And I was wondering whether you have thought about comparing the Palestinian case with institutions of marriage among black Muslims in the US, because I teach a class about gender and sexuality in Islam every year. And one of the weeks was given to an examination of marriages among black Muslim women. And because of the high rate of incarceration among black men in the US and the high rate of divorce among black men and black African Americans in the US, so Islamic marriages, Islamic institutions of marriage became a way of protecting the women, and converted African American women actively sought out Islamic marriages. And in that sense, by playing that more or less protecting and nurturing role, the Islamic marriage became an institution of resistance as well among black Muslims. So that would be a very interesting, comparison between the Palestinian case and the, African American case. Just one suggestion.
I think it's very interesting what you raise about how a particular kind of marriage can be a form of resistance, because that's what I hear you say, because the situations are, of course, the incarceration is there, but the situations are very different when you're in a majority setting where, an Islamic marriage is a normal thing to do, and it's at the same time also often a state-supported marriage, or the United States, what is, of course, where you're in a minority situation. But I do think that it's very interesting to link it to the notion of resistance, because that is, I think, what is the linchpin which brings them together. Because then also in the Palestinian case, the way in which women actually talk about the particular kinds of marriage, there's some of the political prisoners would enter into, is very much framed into the way in which it is completely linked to their notion of what is politically important, what is the political future, and how they see that tied in with, they really link the reproduction of the family, the reproduction of the political movement, and the reproduction of the nation together there. That's very strongly linked together. And another example, which I will not elaborate on further, another example is, of course, the way in which at a certain moment sperm smuggling became an important thing amongst Palestinian prisoners, which also was very much, to produce life. And this actually brought me to the clip also, We Teach Life, because what we have been hearing also so often in the Netherlands, and also to my dismay by one of the leaders of a large left-wing party, is the notion from we love life and they love death. And that is a strong notion that has come up a number of times. And I think it's very important, to emphasize precisely the fact that people make such a great effort to actually produce life and to produce hope.
I mean, you find I can't say, same, but very similar genealogies of resistance among black Muslim women in the US, because they are going back to the history of Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, and Malcolm X. They're saying, what we are doing in terms of, reinventing the classical Islamic institutions of marriage is actually giving back life to black families. Yeah. So that's a very interesting,
fascinating. Thank you so much for making this comment. It's very helpful.
Okay, I want to thank all of you for sharing your work with us, and I want to encourage all of you two things. Buy a book, they're in the back, and please join us for a drink. You're all welcome. It will be over here. Okay, thank you.